Hi y'all, welcome back to the garden. So today we're going to be focusing on pruning shrubs. I'm going to start out with my hydrangeas, all the hydrangea types that are commercially available. We're going to move to my roses, including pruning my rose wall. And then I'm going to tackle some Ninebarks, some 𝗟𝗶𝗸𝗲, and some other small things, just because I want to get as many of my shrubs. I hope to be able to get all of my shrubs pruned today. There's not a whole lot of my shrubs that need pruning because I've tried to plant stuff that doesn't need pruning at all. But some things do, like hydrangeas. Now, a little background on this. This is Hydrangea Limelight Prime. It is an improved version of Limelight. I planted 36 of these in this hedge as 5-gallon containers, and then I have 8 over there on the other side of the fence that I planted as 1 gallons. The 1 gallons are much smaller, won't need a whole lot. Pruning Hydrangeas paniculata, panicle hydrangea, which is what these are, is relatively simple. Today I'm going to be focused on a few things. One, since this is their first year in the ground, I'm not going to be removing a ton of stuff or cutting it back significantly. Typically Hydrangeas paniculata and arborescens you can cut back by a third or maybe even a half if you're trying to size control it. If it's brand new in the ground and you planted it maybe from a 1 or 3 gallon, maybe you don't need to do anything but snip the top blooms off. But we'll talk about some of those things as we get started. So I'm going to set the camera up and we're going to go over pruning paniculata, then we'll go over arborescens, Macrofila, and 𝗟𝗶𝗸𝗲, which is Oakleaf hydrangea. So because these were planted as 5 gallons and I want them to get kind of large, I'm not going to be pruning a whole lot into the shrub or probably even cutting it back by a third this year. I'm going to focus on pruning down to 1 bud, maybe 2, and overall evening the appearance of it. So what you're looking for, which these are a little late, I would typically prune them a little earlier, but we had a lot of rain, is where a bud comes out. So when these start emerging, they're real tiny, but you can still see them. When they start cracking and you can see a little green is typically when I prune them, but you want to prune just above 1. Something else you want to focus on is removing the 3 Ds, dead, damaged, and disease. These hydrangeas had no disease on them last year, so that's not a concern. They all look really healthy. I'm not seeing any dead on this plant, but there are some damage here and there. They may have just got broken from wind. You can see this one right here. It's kind of pointing down. I'm just going to cut that right off. Here's another damaged, it's broken branch here, so we'll remove that. And then I'm going to go through and prune all of this up. Now you can also, and I may selectively do this, remove any kind of weird growth that may be growing the wrong direction or maybe inverted. Sometimes the hydrangeas, as they're small, you can maybe see down here, there's a branch that's growing down. And so we'll cut those things out. And anything smaller than a pencil, you can typically prune out. However, if you have a small hydrangea like this one, there's not many branches on it that are smaller than a pencil, so you don't want to prune all of those out. Be mindful of its structure, and you can leave some things to thicken up this year and they'll get bigger than a pencil. But when a Hydrangea paniculata is small like this, you're wanting to form some really nice branch structure to hold the blooms up in the future. So this is Limelight Prime. It's an improved version of Limelight. It holds its blooms up better than Limelight does, but you still want to put good pruning habits into place to make sure that it does. So I'm going to go through and start pruning this up, and we'll look at it when we're done. All right, and that's what we're looking for. Like I said, you could go in here and cut out some from the center to kind of add some more airflow to that. I'm not going to be doing that this year because I want it to focus on thickening up and branching out well, so we'll become a seamless hedge here. Now, is it reasonable to prune all 36 plus 8, so 44 of these Limelight Primes individually by hand when I have this many? Nah, maybe not, but this is their first year pruning, the first prune I've ever done on them, so I want to set them up for success. In future years, after they've developed a nice sturdy branch structure, I will probably come through with hedge clippers. I've done that before on my bobo hydrangeas, 𝗟𝗶𝗸𝗲s produce a ton of blooms, and so it's really hard and tedious to go in and prune them individually like this. Like even this Limelight Prime has more branch structure than is typical on what I've seen on a Limelight that I had at my last property. And so it'd be really tedious to come through and cut back all of these. If you wanted to cut back a lot of the smaller branches, that could lead to some bigger blooms. So that's something to consider as well. I want to focus on the existing branch structure getting thicker to support blooms in the future. So right now I'm not going to be pruning a whole lot of that out, but there's a lot of options. There's not really necessarily a wrong way other than cutting it off at the ground. But just do what's best based on the age and the size and the variety of your Hydrangea paniculata. All right, I'm going to go through and try and clean up the rest of these 36, and I'll be back in a bit. All right, so I got 3 hydrangeas into this, and I realized it's going to take longer than I anticipated. So I'm just going to cut them back with hedge shears. And when you're using hedge shears to prune hydrangeas like this in a hedge, you just want to kind of round them out. So I'm going to clip off all the buds, basically. Same thing I was doing, but much faster, and then I'll rake up and clean the buds afterwards. If this is a new hydrangea that you just planted, that is a 1 gallon or maybe even a 3 gallon, I would recommend you spend the time manually cutting them. But as an attorney, I realize sometimes after you have to bill your time and realize how valuable some time is, there's so many more things I could be doing than spending a couple hours pruning these 36 hydrangeas. Something I did not anticipate when I was pruning this is Proven Winners has been breeding their paniculatas to produce so many branches and so many blooms. And so with that comes an additional cut every time you have to prune off a bloom. A lot of the older hydrangeas that I had at my last garden didn't have this many stems. And so I'm going to go through and just prune them off with hedge shears. They will be perfectly fine, and you and I won't notice it in about another month. This is what no one tells you about planting a massive hydrangea hedge. I will come through with the mower and mulch this into the ground, and you won't even be able to tell it in the next week or so. That's typically how I handle these situations. But let's take a look at the hydrangea hedge now. So it took me way less time. I took a leaf blower and blew the panicles out into the yard, as you could see. And one of the reasons I did this on this variety hydrangea, which I didn't mention earlier, is if you're used to pruning like Limelight, the leaf nodes between Limelight are pretty wide. And so you can see on this Limelight Prime, since you typically want to prune above a leaf node, you can see how close those leaf buds are right there. That's like maybe an inch. This one may be between 1 and 2 inches, so they're really close. So just taking the hedge clippers and going along there, pruned them off almost perfectly in most cases. And so if there's any weird growth in there, I'll come through and take a look at it in another week and see if I see anything that I think needs to be removed. But overall, these look pretty good. And then of course I can trim on them if I see any weird stuff going on during the growing season. But overall, these are well branched, and this is how the garden center is going to prune them anyway, as they're being grown in their containers, especially if they keep them from year to year and they're grown on for a pretty long while. They're not going to spend time individually pruning them because that would take a really long time, especially for these newer varieties. So this is good for varieties like this Limelight Prime, 𝗟𝗶𝗸𝗲, and also pufferfish produces a ton of branching. Some of the other hydrangeas don't produce quite as much, and so you can individually hand prune those. And I'm going to hand prune the Limelight Prime over there because they're still pretty small, so let's go do that right quick. So here you can see these Limelight Primes need some pruning work and some good pruning practices. There's very little branching on them. These were planted as a 1 gallon. I planted these in the fall of 2023, right after I moved in. The 5 gallon Limelight Prime that I found locally from Brown's was planted spring 2024. So they just been in the ground a year. These look pretty rough last year. They had a rough go of it. This is one of the first beds that I planted kind of after I moved in. But we need to work on the branch structure of them. They look like they're putting off some nice small branches at the bottom, which will fill out this year. But I'm going to just kind of even up their growth habit here because it's a little weird. We've got some big branches sticking off and very uneven growth. And hopefully that will even up some of the growth this year. Some of them are smaller than others, but we'll just move down the line here. Like this one doesn't look too bad. It's a little open, so I'll probably prune back a little bit. It seems to be falling out more than it is tall. But we'll just get some evenness to this one right here, how it looks. And that will encourage better branching going forward. And there we go. Nothing too crazy, but you can see it's kind of more even ball shaped here. All right, that's also a good indicator of sometimes why you just spend a little more money up front and get the bigger size root ball from the garden center. It's always, most of the time, cheaper to purchase a 1 gallon or a quart over a 3 gallon or a 5 gallon, but you pay for that in time. So if you want something that looks much fuller sooner, then you pick up a bigger container at the garden center, because otherwise you're paying for their time to grow it, or you're spending the time growing it yourself. All right, so this is Hydrangea arborescens, also called smooth leaf hydrangea. This is flowerful, the new variety from Bailey that produces really strong stems. You can see how strong these stems are, and also produces 2 to 3 times as more blooms as other arborescens hydrangeas on the market. So pruning these is largely the same as paniculata. You can cut them down by 1/3. If I had a larger hedge than just 5 of them here, I might use the hedge clipper method. At my last garden, I just did these by hand because I had 5 of them there as well. So we're just going to prune these back a little bit. These have stronger stems. But if you don't have this flowerful variety and you have a different variety like 𝗟𝗶𝗸𝗲, you'll want to spend the time, make sure you're building up this lower branch structure. These I wish were leafed out a little more. They're on the north side of the house. Typically I'd let the bud swell a little more before I prune them, but you can see the bud here maybe. It's just a little green leaf. But if you have a variety that's not flowerful, it's important to establish a good branch structure on these because they have a tendency to flop, especially if you just have the 𝗟𝗶𝗸𝗲 variety. So that's all I'm really going to do to this one right here. I just kind of evened it out because I wanted to grow up this season. There may be some dead growth on it from our rough winter that I'll come back and prune on in a couple weeks, but I just wanted to make sure I got most of the evenness out right now. These could probably go without pruning this year. They were 1 gallons, pretty big for a 1 gallon plant, but I'm just going to even them out so the blooms and everything and the growth this season will look a little more even. Sometimes you can come through, depending on how old they are, and just prune off the bloom, which is what I'm going to do to this one right here because it's relatively small. 𝗟𝗶𝗸𝗲 grows in clumps from the base, or smooth hydrangea, so it'll probably put some new growth out this season from the bottom and thicken up. But this will be an easy way to just prune back to a leaf node and get this job done really quickly. All right, Oakleaf hydrangeas, some of the varieties can be what I'll just call self-shedding, and so there are no blooms to remove. Oakleaf hydrangea bloom on old wood, so you don't want to cut them back like we were doing to the paniculata, panicle hydrangeas, or the smooth arborescens varieties. But what you do want to do is just come in here and remove the old bloom. So I'm just going to snip down here to the base like that. This is a smaller variety called Ruby Slippers. It'll be beautiful here in a few years. It was beautiful last year. It blooms pretty early in the season for me. And that's all we're going to do to this one. If you prune any into it, you could risk losing some blooms for this season. But you still, if you have any dead, disease, or damage growth or limbs, go ahead and remove those. Now let's talk about Hydrangea Macrofila or mountain hydrangea. You treat them pretty similarly. Traditionally, Hydrangea Macrofila bloomed only on old wood. That means they set buds on last year's growth. In our cold climates, that tends to die either over winter or in the spring when we have late frosts. You don't want to prune them at all. You can remove disease, dead, or damaged growth. You can come through and prune off the buds. So at this time of year, I might do this. With the winter we had, I'm not going to do anything to these today because I don't want to have to prune them twice. I expect a lot of these to have died down to the ground. So if I move some leaves down here at the bottom, there's a green bud down here. I'm going to wait because we still have maybe not quite a month, maybe a few weeks of potential frost left. I'm going to wait and see if these wake up anymore, and then the stems may have died completely to the ground, or they may have died partially to the ground, and I will go and cut back the stem all the way to where the bud is, the last bud on the plant. And so all of the hydrangeas I have in this bed here are varieties, hybrids that bloom on old wood and new wood, so I should get blooms out of them this year. That doesn't mean that I will. They're all different varieties that I'm trialing to see which blooms best here in Southwest Ohio. But Hydrangea Macrofila, that's typically how you want to treat them. Give them a little time to wake up in the spring. It's a bit early for these because we are in mid-April. And then after they've woken up, or you're certain they've woken up, you can go back and prune them. You can scratch along the stem to see if they're green if you just want to get the job done. I'm not in any particular hurry for these because I'm trialing them for you guys. So I will wait and let these wake up a little longer, and then we'll check in an update in a future video. So let's talk about rose pruning, the next thing on my list today. This is probably the best surviving rose over winter in my garden. This is the Poet's Wife. I've talked about this one for years. It came from Heirloom Roses last year. It's also one of the most vigorous ones that I have. It's produced a lot of growth, looks really great, gets definitely full sun here. And we're going to prune this back today just to even it up. It'll probably be cut mostly here. I've got some taller branches here I might leave, but some of these, like this stem, is dead pretty much to the base almost, so I'll remove that one. And we're just going to get this cleaned up. I did order some rose gloves, but they don't come in until tomorrow. So I'm going to have all my roses pruned up before my rose gloves come in, but that's okay. I'll try not to get stuck too bad by these roses. So I'm just going to come back and even this up and cut back to where some of the new growth is. You want to cut where a bud is shooting outwards. So you can see here, there's some growth. This growth is growing up. That's good. If it was growing down, I might cut that one off. You just want to encourage a vase-like shape on these roses because that will encourage the best airflow and least diseases starting out in the season anyway. So I'm just going to cut back the dead here. It won't take too long because this one's actually growing quite well compared to the others in my garden, as I mentioned. Let's cut this one all the way back because it's completely dead. Okay, that is for the most part it. So this one survived quite well. I did no pruning on it in the fall. I'm going to come through and apply some copper fungicide. I pre-mixed this and I've been spraying on my roses as I prune them. This will just prevent some of that black spot. Here's some old rose hips I missed. Clip those off. So I'm just going to apply this all over the leaves. You kind of want to get the tops and the bottoms. Kind of hard with a sprayer because I'm running out here. Have to mix some more, but Just get it coated really well, and that should be good as a preventative for early black spot with these rainy weather that we're having. All right, this is a Ninebark. Typically, my recommendations are to not prune Ninebark at all. But this one had been having a lot of dead growth. And I asked some viewers last year if they prune their Ninebark, and several said they do quite often, and it kind of gives them a rejuvenation prune. So you typically don't want to prune Ninebark because they have this nice vase shape. If you cut it anywhere kind of here halfway, then it just ruins the shape. So what I'm going to be doing today may seem pretty drastic, but I'm going to be cutting it down to the ground. I would have liked to have done this a little earlier before it started putting off growth. Didn't get to it because of the rain, and so I'm just going to take the hedge pruners here and cut it off at the ground, and then all the new growth that comes back will be fresh and pretty. And so I've got 2 of these I'm going to do that to right quick. It means all this will produce fresh, new, long growth, and it'll be much happier, hopefully, because of it. These Ninebark were here when I moved into the property. They weren't planted exactly right here, but they looked really rough because they hadn't been cared for really great. We had had some really dry summers, probably hadn't been watered, and so there was a lot of dead kind of branching on it that would have been more difficult to cut out. So we're going to start fresh, and so that's about it for now. I didn't cut it completely to the ground, but it's close enough to the ground. It's kind of even with soil level here. And then all the new growth, hopefully it'll encourage some thickening up and some branching. I would not recommend cutting it partway. This is the other one, and this is the one that looked worse in my opinion than the other one. But you can see it's not even quite leafed out as much as the other one, and it's just, 20 feet away. So this one's struggling a little bit, so we're gonna reset it, so to speak. Can follow along and keep an eye on this, and we'll see how it ends up, but I think it'll be perfectly fine. I will fertilize these at least to get them a little nutrition and get going in the next week or so. I don't want to encourage too much before our last frost and push any growth that might get killed by a freeze, but we'll get that done probably in the next couple weeks. This is a 𝗟𝗶𝗸𝗲, commonly known as a bluebeard. I was a little bit concerned about this one because some of the others on the property that are the same variety haven't or have already started pushing leaves. This one has not, but 𝗟𝗶𝗸𝗲 blooms only on new wood, so you want to cut it back some. I'm going to cut it back to about here. And the last one in this garden bed pretty much that needs any type of pruning is this snowberry. Snowberries produce white berries. They also have some varieties that produce pink. It's called 𝗟𝗶𝗸𝗲. This is First Edition's Galaxy Snowberry. It produces really beautiful white blooms. And I've grown Proudberry Coralberry from Proven Winners for years. These grow really well here, and you usually just cut them 6 to 12 inches from the ground, and then they bloom like crazy for you. So you can see there's a little bit of dead branching in here, so that's the best thing to kind of reset these, and you do this every year. So it may seem drastic, but they like it. It's still too early to determine whether I've lost any shrubs in this bed. It's hard to say. Some of them look a little rough, but a lot of the ones that look a little rough are varieties like Vitex that are typically warm climate shrubs, but they're supposed to survive here. Did have a rough winter, so we'll see how that goes this season. But most everything's waking up pretty good. Still a little early. I hate to see some of this stuff leafing out so soon with future freezes as a potential, but that's just the way it is. Mother Nature's going to do what it's going to do, and so a lot of the stuff will be fine if it gets a little bit of frost. Shrubs are resilient. That's why I like planting them so much. Thank y'all for joining me today. I basically just needed one pretty weekend. Next weekend looks like we have the potential for rain, but it's been really nice in the 40s and 50s this weekend, which allowed me to get outside and get a lot of prep done. There's probably still some things that I need to work on here and there, prune back, but a lot of my pruning, well, I got done this week. It's a nice thing about having shrubs, and a nice thing about planting a low maintenance garden. I don't necessarily want to call my garden low maintenance because it requires a lot of work, but I try and plant things that are low maintenance, and so there's not a whole lot of stuff to do in spring or fall. There's, you know, things to do always in the garden, but try to make it as easy as possible. Thank y'all for joining me. I'm going to get the mower out and mow over all of my litter of hydrangea blooms over here and clean up the mess I made today. Thank y'all.